And the previous program was Heart of Mind Radio with Catherine Davis, and that's heard Fridays at 11 p.m. here on WBAI New York, 99.5 FM, and WBAI.org online. Stay tuned for Frontline Voices with Rebecca Myles. It's 12 noon.
Voices. I'm the host of the show, Rebecca Myles. On the show today, we'll talk to Jason Rylander, Legal Director of Biological Diversity Center's Climate Law Institute, on the Trump plan to roll back EPA emissions and implications for public and planet health. Also joining us later on the show is Dr. Amanda Wynn, who released a report through GoodRx. That was on health deserts around the country. I'm sure you've heard of food deserts. I've heard of media deserts. This is how documents how close the nearest hospital is to you, pharmacy, and the prospects of further health deserts with the upcoming of $1 trillion cuts in Medicaid over the next 10 years under Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill Act. But first, some news headline. Oh, and later on the show, we'll be able to talk to Larry Ham, who was at Newark Airport this morning to welcome back Chris Smalls, who had just come back from being on the Freedom Flotilla trying to deliver aid to Gaza before the IDF boarded the ship and beat him up. We'll have more on that later in the show. So we'll go now to some news headlines. President Donald Trump signed executive orders Thursday evening imposing tariffs of between 15 to 41% on goods shipped to the U.S. from more than 67 countries. This ratchets up tariffs to the highest levels in more than a century. The new duties won't go into effect, however, until August the 7th, giving further opportunity to negotiate the percentages down. Trump has promised his new tax hikes on nearly $3 trillion in goods imported to the U.S. and that he claims will usher in new foundations of wealth, launch a slew of new factory jobs, reduce the budget deficits, and get other countries to treat America with more respect. The tariffs risk America's global standing as allies feel forced into deals and taxes on raw materials used by U.S. factories and basic goods. threatened to create new inflationary pressures and hamper economic growth, and concerns the Trump administration has dismissed. It's unclear whether the new tariffs will survive a legal challenge. Federal judges are skeptical about Trump's use of a 1977 law to declare the long-standing U.S. trade deficit as a national emergency that justifies tariffs. The Trump administration has pointed to the increase in federal revenues, a sign that tariffs will reduce the budget deficit of $127 billion in customs and duty collections so far this year, about $70 billion more than last year. Concerns, however, about inflation rising are reasonable. Personal consumption expenditures indexes show that prices have climbed 2.6% over the 12 months that ended in June, and the U.S. economy has 37,000 fewer manufacturing jobs than it did in April. In Gaza, a staff member of the UN's Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in Gaza, Olga Cherevko, says that while Israel is now letting slightly more aid into the Strip, it's not nearly enough to even scratch the surface to meet people's needs on the ground. At least 7 people were killed and dozens injured while waiting for food supplies near the Morag corridor south of Khan Yunis this morning. At least 83 Palestinians, including 53 aid seekers, have been killed and 544 injured in Israeli attacks across Gaza in the past 24 hours, according to the Gaza Strip's health ministry. The total number of aid seekers killed since May 27, when Israel introduced a new aid distribution mechanism, the GHF, has reached 1,383, with more than 9,218 injured. U.S. Envoy Steve Witkoff and U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee visited aid distribution sites in Gaza run by the controversial U.S. and IDF-backed GHF. This comes as condemnation of Israel and its support by the U.S. is growing over famine in Gaza, and reports that more than 1,000 desperately seeking Palestinians have been killed at the 4 sites since May. Huckabee said the visit was to learn the truth about the GHF distribution activities, which was funded by the Trump administration through $60 million. During the trip, they were briefed by the Israeli military and spoke to folks on the ground. Al Jazeera reported that no incidents were reported at the GHS centres this morning. Their reporter, Hani Mahood, said the whole thing was staged and the shooting would have started right away the moment the gates opened and the crowds gathered. Human Rights Watch calls Israel's use of starvation as civilians as a weapon of war, a war crime. Quote, Israeli forces are not only deliberately starving Palestinian civilians, but they are now gunning them down almost every day as they desperately seek food for their families, said Belkis Willi, Associate Crisis and Conflict Director at Human Rights Watch. The rights group is calling on states to pressure Israel to immediately stop its use of lethal force against Palestinian civilians and lift its restrictions on the entry of aid into Gaza. It also urged the US and Israel suspend the GHF distribution system. The Pentagon has said it's ending the deployment of all but 250 National Guard troops originally sent to Los Angeles to deal with protests over the Trump administration's immigration crackdown. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth ordered 1,350 National Guard members to leave this week. The rest will stay to protect federal personnel and property, according to the Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell. Roughly 4,000 National Guard soldiers and 700 Marines were deployed to L.A. in early June over the objections of state and local officials. Half the guards were pulled back 2 weeks ago, and the Marines were ordered to leave a few days later. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency is tasked with carrying out the Trump administration's mass deportation agenda, said it's made offers to more than 1,000 people as it ramps up hiring following the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that gave the agency $170 billion for border security and immigration enforcement. The agency spokesman, Tricia McLaughlin, said many of the offers went to ICE officers who retired under President Biden because they were frustrated they were not allowed to do their jobs. The agency has been ramping up arrests across the country. Stephen Miller, White House Deputy Chief of Staff, has said ICE would have a target of at least 3,000 arrests a day, up from 650 a day, during the first 5 months of the Trump's second term. The heightened enforcement has resulted in arrests at immigration courts, work sites and neighborhoods. ICE will receive $76.5 million, nearly 10 times its current annual budget, and some $45 billion will go towards increased detention capacity, according to AP. Nearly $30 billion is for hiring 10,000 more staff so the agency can meet its goal of 1 million annual deportations. The White House said ICE will grow from 20,000 to 30,000 employees. As part of its own campaign, it offers a bonus of $50,000 for new recruits, as well as other benefits like student loan forgiveness and abundant overtime for deportation officers. This comes as the federal government has been firing thousands of federal employees. We'll go now to our guest. Welcome to the show. Just bear with me. Sorry, I'm just trying to... welcoming now to the show Dr. Amanda Wynne from Good RX, who's just authored a report on health deserts around the country. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I've read... It's the wrong guest. Sorry. Welcome to the show now is Jason Rylander, Legal Director of Biological Diversity Center's Climate Law Institute, on Trump's plan to roll back EPA emissions and implications for public and planet health. Welcome to the show, Jason. Sorry about that.
Thank you for having me on. It's my pleasure.
So the announcement came down this week about the rollback that would eliminate or weaken environmental protections. These were put in place under the 2009 under the Obama administration. This concerned emissions policies, particularly for cars and trucks. How do you respond to the claims that the changes are necessary for job creation and energy independence, especially in light of their potential environmental impact?
Well, those claims are ridiculous. This is just a very reckless proposal from the Trump administration, and it flies in the face not only of economics and public health, but just sound science. The endangerment finding, which is what we're talking about here, was developed by the Environmental Protection Agency in 2009 in response to overwhelming scientific consensus that greenhouse gases contribute to climate change and that endangers public health. It's a fairly basic scientific finding that has been reinforced time and time again by the IPCC, the UN's climate science body, by the United States' own National Climate Assessment, and by hundreds, if not thousands, of published peer-reviewed scientific reports in the scientific literature. So for them to withdraw the endangerment finding is basically to deny that climate change exists and to deny the legal precursor that EPA needs in order to be able to put specific rules into place to address emissions, like the tailpipe rule for cars or like some of the smokestack rules for power plants and other stationary sources. So it's a big deal, and it will have significant public health impacts and significant impacts on our ability to fight climate change.
Well, perhaps you can map out what the long-term environmental consequences might be of reversing this policy. And of course, it has some way to go. I know there will be legal pushback. There's a public comment period. I'm sure everyone's going to weigh in on that. But perhaps you could just sort of map out what this rolling these back would do.
Well, just to give one example, the vehicle rules that they're proposing to eliminate would have cut 7 billion metric tons of emissions and saved the average American driver more than $6,000 in fuel and maintenance costs over the lifetime of the vehicles that were made under these standards. So this is going to, cost consumers money. It's going to impact our ability to fight global warming. The United States is responsible for more than 10% of global emissions. And if we take the position that this administration seems to be taking, that the emissions from cars and from power plants and others simply don't matter, then we will be shirking our responsibility to address the climate harms that, as the world's leading historical emitter, we have contributed to. And that just doesn't make a great deal of sense.
And what about the pushback on this decision, the public comment period, and then legal routes that you might take?
Well, we're absolutely going to comment on this proposal. I know my organization, the Center for Biological Diversity, and many other environmental groups will challenge this in court if it ever becomes finalized. I mean, we will point out all of the ways that this worsens climate change, but also we'll point out how this administration's actions are going to worsen heart and lung disease, sicken kids with asthma, stoke wildfires, storms, and floods, and have devastating impacts for public health and the environment. So we'll make those arguments in our comments, and then we'll make them in court, and we hope that we'll be able to stop them from taking this disastrous step for people on the planet.
And what about car manufacturers who were working under the premise that these emission regulations were in effect and making decisions about manufacturing? What's this challenge to all of that done?
I think it's actually very disabling for industry to continually have to recalibrate when a new administration comes into office. The United States is falling behind the world in terms of renewable energy production, in terms of electric vehicle production. We have essentially ceded the electric vehicle market now to China, which is sending much cheaper, very fuel-efficient cars all over the world, to Europe, to South America, and throughout Asia. The United States could be a world leader in these areas, but instead we seem to be moving in the wrong direction. And I think that will ultimately have serious economic implications for the American auto industry. And I think some manufacturers will probably continue to put stronger emissions rules in place, continue to advocate for corporate average fuel economy standards, and will produce cars that are more fuel efficient than this administration would otherwise allow.
Right. Now, you touched on this, that we know that stricter emissions regulate air quality. We've just been, I'm in New York, I think you're in Washington. We've just been through another sort of brutal series of days where the air quality was terrible. This was because of Canadian wildfires. And we know that improving air quality lowers rates of asthma, heart disease, and other respiratory illnesses. What about poor health quality, air quality, when these regulations they're proposing to roll back?
Well, yeah, as I was saying before, the Trump administration's actions are going to worsen public health. They will worsen heart and lung disease. They'll lead to more kids with asthma. They will stoke more deadly wildfires and wildfire smoke that blankets our cities at various times of the year. We've already seen significant increases in storms and flooding around the country, even in places that are not in coastal areas. So the idea that we can just ignore climate change and this is somehow going to lead to greater economic prosperity and better public health is utter nonsense. And I hope that the EPA will change its mind on this. I hope the courts will see through this deadly and cynical attempt to roll back environmental laws that protect people on the planet.
Now, the U.S. has been, under democratic administrations, has been a sort of leader in international climate policy. Then we get these rollbacks. What kind of signal does that send about the U.S.'s commitment to global climate action?
Well, unfortunately, we're in a fairly dark period right now for U.S. leadership in the world. The United States has withdrawn from the Paris Climate Accords once again. The Trump administration did that in its first term, and we went back in under the Biden administration, so now we're withdrawing again. And again, it sends these just very mixed signals to the world about what the United States' role is and how much leadership we are going to exhibit as the world's largest historical emitter. I think it also opens up an opportunity, though, if the United States is not going to lead in this area, for other countries to do so. And I think we're seeing significant investment in renewable energy technologies in other countries, including in China. If those countries choose to continue the transition to clean energy economies, then they are the ones that are going to own the rest of the century in terms of economics and sustainability.
So what are the obstacles that future administrations might face in attempting to reinstate stronger emissions standards? And what steps could they take to undo or mitigate the damages caused by this rollback?
One of the biggest things that future administrations will have to deal with is this Trump administration's gutting of EPA and other federal agencies. We're just losing a tremendous amount of expertise. They are firing people who have significant science background, policy background. It's going to make it much more difficult to put rules in place and to take the enforcement actions that we need to take in order to ensure that the laws we do have are being followed and making a difference on the ground. So, rules change from administration to administration, and there is a process for that. It can take some time. The next administration could once again conclude that, yes, indeed, greenhouse gases do contribute to climate change and affect public health, and put the endangerment finding back in place, and then restore EPA's ability to regulate in these various industrial sectors. But they will also need to redesign and redevelop the agencies that are charged with protecting public health. And that's going to be a big job. It will not be easy to turn this ship around.
Now, Jason, you're part of the Biological Diversity Center organizations, and oftentimes we talk about public health and our habits on the planet, but the voices absent are the ones who have no voices. This is plant life, this is animal life, this is the condition of the planet. How do these constant reversals affect the outcome for the state of the planet?
Well, I work for the Center for Biological Diversity, and our mission is saving life on Earth. And by that, we mean all life. Our focus for many years since our founding has been on the preservation of endangered and threatened species and the maintenance of the Earth's biodiversity in the United States and also around the world. So we are acutely aware that the efforts of this administration to gut EPA, but also to undermine the Endangered Species Act and other federal laws, are going to have significant impacts on our ability to preserve biodiversity and life on Earth. We have a lot of legal cases pending right now to try to get protections for species that need them. We are fighting in this administration in court to stop them from removing protections from species great and small around the country that still require active management and conservation in order to survive the century and beyond. So it's a serious problem. If protections for habitat continue to be undermined, if protections on take or killing or commercial trade in endangered species are undermined, then we will have a much more difficult job ensuring that future generations enjoy the wildlife and the wild places that we grew up with. I think it's a travesty. We're doing everything we can to fight it.
There's so much greenwashing that goes on that there is no climate change, while we live through another flooding all around. How it seems that this alternative view is able to gain strength and strength. How does your organization fight against that? Well,
I think we continue to speak truth to power. The scientific community in particular has been increasingly vocal about the long-term impacts of greenhouse gas pollution on climate change and the effect that will have on people and wildlife and wild places around the world. Our organization helped coordinate a publication that came out a few months ago called The Scientist's Warning on Fossil Fuels, and it is unequivocal about our need to transition to a clean energy economy if we are going to keep the Earth's temperature at levels that have historically sustained life as we know it. We know that temperature is rising 1.5 degrees, is heading more toward 2 degrees now. We're going to see significant impacts around the world in terms of fires, in terms of floods, in terms of droughts, famines. That has geopolitical implications as well. If people can no longer live in the places that they have lived, we'll see additional migration. And for this administration to simply put its head in the sand out of fealty to the oil and gas industry and billionaires who bankroll politicians like the Trump administration, is really turning its back on our future and our children's future. So, we just continue to advocate to put the truth out there as to make sure that people are aware of what the science is and to draw attention to the linkages between greenhouse gas emissions, climate change, and the kinds of things that we're seeing here on the ground that are devastating communities all around the world. And we need politicians and other leadership to take that up and to continue, to fight for us and not for polluters and billionaires and heavy industry.
Jason Rylander, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great. That was Jason Rylander, Legal Director from the Biological Diversity Center's Climate Law Institute, on the Trump plan to roll back EPA emissions and the implications for public and planet health. We'll take a break and we'll be back shortly. And joining us now on Frontline Voices, I'm the host of the show, Rebecca Myles. You're listening to WBAI 99.5 FM in New York City. Joining us now is Dr. Amanda Wynn from Good RX, where she's just authored a report on health deserts around the country, how close you are to the nearest hospital or a pharmacy, and, of course, the prospect of further health deserts with the upcoming $1 trillion cut from Medicaid over the next 10 years under the Trump administration's One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Welcome to the show this afternoon, Amanda Wynn.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Not at all. I'm glad to have you. Just for listeners who are not familiar with this new expression, deserts, these healthcare deserts, media deserts, food deserts. I'm familiar with food deserts. That means that you don't have access to local fresh produce in your neighborhood. Media desert, that the local newspaper you used to rely on for what was happening in your town has disappeared. Now there's healthcare deserts. What are healthcare deserts?
Yeah, so we defined healthcare deserts as having adequate access to healthcare on multiple dimensions. That includes medications, primary care, hospitals, emergency services like trauma care, and community health centers. And so we wanted to define meaningful thresholds for real barriers to healthcare access on these different dimensions. So in the ideal world, when you go see your doctor and you get a prescription, you'd be able to fill that prescription at a nearby pharmacy with the closest price. If you get in an accident, you'll be able to go to the hospital, and if it's a severe accident where you may need some trauma care, you'd be able to get the care that you need within a reasonable window where it won't affect the quality of your care. And that's really the motivation behind how we defined healthcare deserts. We wanted to look at a comprehensive view of how can people access and maintain their health.
And what you found in your report, where you took the whole of the states and you went county by county, you found that the state of healthcare in the US, that 80% of counties now qualify as healthcare deserts. That's pretty shocking. What does it mean, though, in actuality?
Yeah, so that means that about 1 in 3 Americans, those counties have about 120 million people, lack access to at least one essential healthcare service, like a pharmacy, hospital, trauma center, primary care, and federally funded community health centers. So that means that people face longer drive times, longer appointment wait times, maybe even longer times at the counter, just because their access to that healthcare infrastructure is limited in some capacity. So you could live in an area where you have access to primary care, but the closest hospital with a trauma center is still over an hour away. Or you could live in an area where maybe you have access to pharmacies, but your local hospital doesn't have enough hospital beds to meet the capacity in case that's recommended.
All right. So your report has found that since 2021, more than 1,300 pharmacies have closed, pushing the number of people living in pharmacy deserts from 41 million to 48.4 million. Why are pharmacy closures accelerating, and what are the long-term health implications of 48 million Americans now living in pharmacy deserts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we found that steep rise in pharmacy closures has resulted in, millions of people without access to multiple pharmacies. When we looked at pharmacy deserts, we specifically looked at being able to access more than one pharmacy in your area. And that's to account for the fact that your closest pharmacy could close, or even if it's open, there could be an issue with a shortage where your medication isn't in stock and you need to drive to the next pharmacy over to get it. Also, medication prices actually differ across different pharmacies. And so for people to get the most affordable medication, they may need to even drive further. And so that rise in pharmacy closures is really going to impact people's access to getting their medications. And that can result in a feedback effect, where if a local pharmacy closes, fewer prescriptions get filled, and that can impact people's medication adherence and overall health. And that reduced demand can then spill over and make it even more difficult for existing pharmacies to stay open.
Right. Another point was that nearly 50 million people now live more than an hour from a trauma centre, and 28 million live over 30 minutes from the nearest hospital. What are the immediate risks for people living so far from a trauma care or hospital, and how do these delays affect survival in emergencies like strokes or accidents?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so in life-threatening emergencies, distance to emergency care is a big and a potentially deadly barrier. And we find that 50 million people still live more than an hour from trauma care, and over 20 million are more than 30 minutes from the nearest hospital. And so we looked at, there's plenty of clinical research that shows that distance and time until care, especially in the case of a traumatic injury, can affect your likelihood of survival. And that can result in even worsening these healthcare barriers that people face. And you can look at in our report on healthcare deserts, we also have a video that talks and interviews people firsthand, so paramedics who are working in trauma center and hospital deserts, and how that impacts, their daily experience trying to help people.
So how might healthcare provisions under the Trump administration's HR bill accelerate the collapse of access to rural and low-income communities?
Yes, so the healthcare related provisions in the One Big Beautiful Act can have broad and significant impact on not just the millions of people who rely on Medicaid, but on the entire healthcare system. So while millions of people could be at risk of losing their Medicaid insurance over the next decade as a result of the act, there are many other potential implications that Americans should be concerned about, ranging from the rise of health insurance premiums, staffing shortages, financial strain on rural hospitals or other healthcare facilities like community health centers that may be forced to close as a result. And at GoodRx, we continue to be focused on improving access and affordability with Americans, which they may need more than ever.
So, and how does this disconnect between coverage and actual care challenge our understanding of what healthcare access truly means?
Yeah, so with healthcare deserts, we looked at access to the infrastructure, but obviously if you can't even access that infrastructure because of, other barriers like socioeconomic barriers, you're still not going to be able to access your healthcare. So there's really a tightly linked relationship between both access to the infrastructure as well as being able to access that care. And we found that healthcare deserts are even more likely to be in places that have lower incomes and have higher rates of uninsurance and lower access to high-speed broadband internet. And those factors are going to compound on top of each other to make it even more difficult for people to access their healthcare. And even in places that, may not be technically healthcare deserts, you will have populations of people without insurance, or even people with insurance who don't have good coverage for their medications, for example. They might find it difficult to access their medications, their healthcare services, even if they, live 15 minutes away from a pharmacy or a doctor.
Right. When you put this report together, were there things you discovered that particularly shocked you?
Yeah, I think the widespread impact was quite surprising. So, you think of certain places where there's large cities, for example, you think that there might be enough infrastructure there. And we definitely do find that healthcare deserts are associated with, more rural areas. But that doesn't mean that healthcare deserts don't affect people who live in, a state like California or New York. In fact, in upstate New York, we find that there's a lot of counties that are impacted by health center deserts, trauma center deserts. In Mariposa County, 100% of the population that lives there lives over an hour away from the closest trauma center, and also is living in a pharmacy desert. And so I think the widespread impact of not having access to at least one dimension of care is really important to think about.
And how did you amass all of this data, and then what were the sources that you were using?
Yeah, so we defined all of these different measures that we wanted to look at, and we mapped out basically the distance from, a census tract centroid. So looking at, for people who live in a certain area, how far it takes for them to get to the closest pharmacy, hospital, health center, and trauma center. And we source that data from a few different data sources. We get our pharmacy data internally at GoodRx, and that's sourced from DataQ, which is a national database of retail pharmacies. And we also got our data on hospitals and trauma centers from the government infrastructure data. We also looked at Indian Health Services to include Indian Health Service hospitals and community centers as well. Community health centers are sourced from the HRSA Health Resources Service Administration. So we mixed a lot of different data points on location and basically linked that to kind of where are people living and mapping out basically how far it takes people to reach those places.
And what will you do with this report? Are you sending it to policy analysts, policy makers, sharing it with the general public? And where can people go to look at it?
Yes, so GoodRx research exists on goodrx.com. We try to publish research for a wide range of audiences that looks at what are the issues in healthcare accessibility, affordability, and equity. GoodRx is the #1 medication savings platform in the U.S., and in a system where cost and complexity can often block access to care, GoodRx is a practical tool to empower people to make more informed, affordable choices. And that's especially critical in healthcare deserts and underserved communities where people can lack consistent access to healthcare. So to read more about this research or find helpful articles to help you manage your health or find medication savings, you can visit goodrx.com.
Dr. Amanda Nguyen, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon and sharing your research. It was really interesting.
Thank you.
That was Amanda Nguyen from GoodRx, who's just authored a report on healthcare deserts around the country, how close is the nearest hospital, pharmacy, and the prospect of further health deserts with the upcoming $1 trillion cut from Medicaid over the next 10 years under the Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill Act. We'll be joined shortly by Lawrence Ham, who was at Newark Airport this morning to welcome back Chris Smalls, the Amazon union organizer and leader, and he'll be joining us shortly on the program. We're joined now by Lawrence Ham, Executive Director of the People's Organisation from Progress. He was at Newark Airport this morning to welcome Chris Smalls home. Chris Smalls, the Amazon Union leader, was beaten and choked by Israeli forces as they illegally boarded the Handler in international waters as the Freedom Flotilla again attempted to bring aid to the massive starving population in Gaza last Saturday. Smalls, most notably the only person of colour on the flotilla, was the only person subject to such brutality. Smalls' New Jersey senators or members of Congress, notably Senator Booker and Senator Andy Kim, have not issued any kind of statement. Smalls has been an outspoken critic of Israel's genocidal blockade of humanitarian aid. So, Larry, welcome to the show. What happened this morning at Newark Airport?
Well, good afternoon. Well, first of all, we weren't at Newark Airport. That was where Chris Smalls was originally supposed to land. But in the last day or so, that was changed to JFK Airport. So I got up very early this morning, around 5 a.m., to do what I had to do to get myself to JFK Airport. And so he landed at JFK. And I have to say, what a wonderful, welcoming brigade he had this morning. People were there from literally all over the country. First of all, there were folks there from New York and New Jersey. The first people I saw, and I might have been one of the first people on the scene, was Paula Rogovin, and one of her comrades were there, and then people started coming in slowly. There was a brother there, Baba Akili, from Black Lives Matter Grassroots. He flew in all the way from Los Angeles, California. There were people there that had driven from Boston all the way down, and on and on and on. Suffice it to say that there were people there from all over the United States. Several hundred people were there at the airport, and we were somewhat concerned. The flight was due in at 9 a.m., and it was pretty close to on time. I would say maybe around 9:20, 9:30, people began to walk into the terminal from the area where the plane had landed, and people kept coming, and then we got worried when we saw the crew and the captain, and we were like, oh no, we hope Chris had not been detained. Now, whether he was detained or not, I was not able to find out. Suffice it to say that eventually Chris showed up, and he was greeted with a hero's welcome. All the people that were there, of course, were there to show solidarity with him and appreciation, but not just for him, for all 21 people, all the activists that were on the Handler that were illegally, essentially pirated by the Israeli government. And so we were there to express our solidarity. And there were drums, and there was chanting, and there were Palestinian flags being waved, and people with keffiyehs. It was quite something to witness. And many of us, including myself, we had tears in our eyes when we finally saw Chris.
And how did he look? Did he look worse, having been beaten up? Did he look like he'd been beaten up? How did he seem?
Well, I got to shake his hand. I got to embrace him, to hug him. And he seemed to be a bit tired. He was moving. He wasn't moving quickly. I'll put it like that. And he was measured in his movements. I can't say he looked like he was injured. He was dressed in such a way that you really couldn't see, his body. Even his face was somewhat covered. He had on his dark glasses. He had his head wrapped with his keffiyeh, I believe. And, but when I shook his hand and I embraced him, he did feel weak. He did feel weak. So he's been through quite an ordeal. I just thank God that he was not killed over there. People have been killed there for much less. Than what he did, and his family. Oh my goodness, how could I leave it? His mother was there. His brother was there. His other family members were there, and I got to speak with his mother, who I had met previously at an event in Englewood, New Jersey. Actually, I believe it was an event related to police brutality. That's where I met his mother, but he was quite warmly surrounded and embraced by so many people that were there. It was really wonderful to witness.
Did he speak to people, or he was just too weary from the trip? And he'd been, of course, held by the Israelis for a week.
Yes. What was your question? Did he? I didn't get to hear.
Yes. Did he make any give any press conference or anything like that, or just
not really? He did speak to press. There was press there, but it didn't appear to me. I mean, unless he did it in another area. I mean, he didn't give like any extensive interviews. Like, he was so surrounded by the crowd, it was even hard for the press to get to him. But there were press there. They did shout out questions to him. He did answer, but his demeanor was quiet strength. I think that's how I would describe his demeanor, one of quiet strength. He was holding up well, but like I said, when I embraced him, he seemed to. I could feel a certain weariness. I wouldn't say exhaustion, but I would say a certain weariness. I mean, what he been through, many of us probably would have fared much worse or responded much worse than he did. We greatly appreciate, his sacrifice and the sacrifice of all the brothers and sisters that were with him, on the Hondola, and who, were trying to show humanitarian compassion by bringing food and medicine to the oppressed people of Gaza who are facing genocide and mass extermination. And it was, he made he and the others that were with him made a really great sacrifice. And the people who were there today at the airport showed their appreciation. When I had arrived, because I got there very early. I was like in the terminal probably around 7:30. And when I got there, I didn't see any police whatsoever. But before the crowd had even grown to significant size, all of a sudden I turned around and there was a whole group of police, and when Chris, he walked slowly from the entrance into the terminal where he first came in. He walked slowly up. He could not walk any other way, because even though they had staff there for us to try to keep a opening for the other passengers who were disboarding, he moved slowly with the crowd toward the door. And when we got outside, there were a lot of police outside. There were police cars, but I have to say the police did not, I don't think they engaged any of us who were there to welcome him. Everything remained peaceful, and the atmosphere was really celebratory. It was very, very upbeat. Doesn't begin to describe, and even now I feel very deep emotion about what happened there today. In this world where there's so much oppression and so much greed and so much hate, to see somebody like Chris, to leave this part of the world and go to another part of the world to show solidarity with the people for whom it seems that the world has turned its back on, is just such an amazing sacrifice, and such an act of compassion, Yeah. We need more of that in the world today.
We certainly do. Larry Ham, I'm going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time, I'm afraid. I always seem to do this to you. I'm sorry about that. But fine. Thank you for going to meet him. I'm sure that meant a great deal, you and the other several hundred people, and for his bravery to do that.
I was there today, not just for myself. I was there representing all the members of the People's Organization for Progress. By the way, there were other POP members there too, Holly Cooper and others. But I was there representing the folks in my organization.
Great. Larry, thank you very much. We'll have you on the show another time, I'm sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca.
Okay.
Take care.
Yeah, you too. That was Larry Ham, Executive Director of the People's Organization for Progress, who was at JFK this morning to welcome Chris Smalls, the Amazon Union leader, back to the U.S. after trying to deliver aid on the Freedom Flotilla to Gaza. And that's all we have time for today. I want to thank Michael G. Haskins, Reggie Johnson for engineering, Jared Collis, our WBAI news intern, for his help with the show. You can find archives of the show on the website, www.wbai.org. If you value this type of programming, please consider making a donation to the station or becoming a WBAI Buddy, a monthly subscription. You set the terms to support programming in the future of the station. Please call 833-922-4692. If no one answers the phone, please leave a message and we'll call you right back with your phone number. Or you can send a check to WBAI Pacifica Radio, care of 388 Atlantic Avenue, Brooklyn, New York, 11271. Thank you for listening and supporting WBAI Pacifica Radio 99.5 FM. I'm the host of Frontline Voices, Rebecca Myles.
This is Stephanie Wells, Executive Director of Pacifica Foundation. Congress has defunded public media, threatening the survival of television and radio stations that provide trusted news, emergency alerts, and vital community connection. Years of corporate media consolidation and deregulation have taken media out of community hands, while social media platforms cut back on fact-checking, leaving communities vulnerable to misinformation. In this time of social crisis and climate emergencies, local stations provide vital information for keeping our communities safe. You can help by supporting and donating to your local community media. This message comes to you in solidarity from the Pacifica Foundation.
Hello, listeners. This is John Brinkley with the WBAI Committee of Inclusion. The deadline for applying for the COI is extended to August the 8th. The Pacifica bylaws establish the Committee of Inclusion, COI, charged with monitoring the following: programming, staffing, and candidates running for the LSB. The COI will also recommend remedies to deficiencies in any of these areas. We are now in the process of filling 7 spots on the COI. If you are interested, go to WBAI.org and fill out the application for the Committee of Inclusion. If you cannot access the Internet, have a question, or need assistance in filling out the application, leave your name and number at 646-218-1233. That's 646-218-1233.
We're in a unique moment here. It's a moment where we have a chance to actually demonstrate our power.
Imhotep Gary Bird heard on WBAI Friday evenings from 7 to 9 p.m.
I learned from Dr. Walter Fontroy, who fought with Dr. King in the Civil Rights Movement, that there were 5 areas that they identified that they felt politics could control and hit. It was health, housing, education, economics, and social justice. The fact is, WBAI is a nexus for the progressive community to make those changes in all of those areas and has been decade after decade. I say to you again, whose station? Our station. Whose control? Our. Long live WBAI.
This is listener-sponsored, locally controlled WBAI New York.
And the previous